What's happening, guys? Arouge again, and this time we're talking about the circulatory system. If we think back to the digestive, the big idea, the digestive system in a nutshell, was to get the food that we eat into our bloodstream. When we looked at the respiratory system, the big idea was take oxygen into our bloodstream, take carbon dioxide out of our bloodstream. When we look at the circulatory system, the big idea is transport that good stuff throughout the body. Okay, so now we have all the stuff in blood. Now we have to move that blood everywhere else. Okay, also we have to bring the carbon dioxide to the lungs so we can get rid of it. And when I say the good stuff, I'm meaning the nutrients from our food and the oxygen that we breathed in. Okay. All right. So first we have to go over what's the difference between an artery and a vein. Arteries, and this is very important, arteries usually carry oxygenated blood. And in diagrams, they're pictured as bright red most of the time. However, the true definition of an artery is a vessel that transports blood away from the heart. Arteries always transport blood away from the heart. And you guys will see why I'm giving you this type of definition. Okay, arteries are also much thicker. Because they're closer to the heart, they're thicker and have to withstand more pressure. Okay, so if you look at this artery versus this vein right here, the artery has a thicker wall. Veins, on the other hand, usually carry deoxygenated blood. Okay, usually, but they always travel back to the heart. Okay, now one characteristic that veins have that make them able to transport blood back to the heart is they have check valves. So if you think about it, the veins in your leg have to transport blood against gravity. So how do they do that? Well, inside of the veins there are these check valves, and as blood goes through, as blood goes up, as gravity forces that blood back down, those check valves seal, they close. And that makes sure the blood is constantly moving upward and not going back down. And if you've ever seen anybody with these bulges in their legs, these bulges are called varicose veins. And the reason why they occur is the valves and the vein are damaged, or they're faulty. So blood will go upward, and then when the effect of gravity, instead of the valves stopping it, the blood goes back down, and it allows that blood to pool in the vein. Okay, so veins have check valves. Next we have capillaries. Capillaries are microscopic blood vessels. You have capillaries that go to nearly every cell of your body, and they're so tiny they are only one cell thick. Okay, they're only one cell thick, and they transport the blood cells in a single file line. Okay, so you can imagine you have lots and lots and lots of capillaries. Why do you want the capillaries to be only one cell thick? Well, remember I said there's capillaries in the alveoli around your in your lungs, and in the villi in your intestine. Well, they want to be super thin so those nutrients can simply diffuse through, in or out. Okay, so the nutrients can diffuse in and the waste can diffuse out. If they were thicker, it wouldn't be able to diffuse very well. Now let's go over the parts of the heart. The basic heart, or the basic structures of the heart, you have 4 chambers. You have 2 atria, or atrium. Those are on top, and they would be these chambers right here. And you have 2 ventricles. These would be the 2 ventricles down here. And I think A comes first in the alphabet, so the 2 atria are on top, and V comes later in the alphabet, so that's on the bottom. The real definition, though, an atria receives blood, and a ventricle sends blood. Okay. So if we go over the parts of the heart and how blood flows through it, we start off with these 2 vessels right here, and they are blue. showing that they have deoxygenated blood. They don't have oxygen yet, and they're transporting blood to the heart. So these would be considered veins. This would be the superior vena cava, and it's transporting blood into the top chamber. This would be the right atrium. I'll go ahead and label that for you. Actually, go and use blue. So it's sending deoxygenated blood into the right atrium. That's the superior vena cava. And then you have the inferior vena cava. That's sending blood also to the right atrium. I'll abbreviate that, RA. Okay. So this is sending blood from the top half of your body, and this is sending blood from the bottom half of your body. Both are ending up in the right atrium. And they're both carrying deoxygenated blood. Next, that blood will go through this valve right here into this ventricle. Okay? And that valve is called the tricuspid valve. In class, we'll go over why it's called a tricuspid valve. Okay? But it's going to go past this valve. The reason that the valve is there is it ensures, just like how there's valves in your veins, this valve in your heart ensures that blood could go through into the ventricle, but when there's pressure going backwards, that valve will close and won't allow blood to go backwards, okay? We have a second valve, the mitral valve. We'll go over that later on as we follow the pathway of blood, okay? So, we're still dealing with deoxygenated blood. We're here in the right atrium. We go down the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle, okay? The right ventricle is going to send the blood past these other valves. This is the pulmonary semilunar valve. And pulmonary is always referring to lungs. If you think of, how do you say lung in Spanish? It's pulmón. So pulmonary is referring to the lungs, and it has that same root, pulmonary, as in pulmón, okay? So the blood's going to go through the pulmonary semilunar valve into this trunk right here. This is the pulmonary trunk. Later, that pulmonary trunk branches off into two vessels going away from the heart. Since they're going away, they're classified as arteries, and they're carrying deoxygenated blood, however. The pulmonary arteries carry blood away from the heart to the lungs. Okay, so over here we have the lungs. It's transporting the blood there to pick up oxygen. Next we have the pulmonary veins. They're carrying oxygenated blood now. However, they're transporting it back to the heart, so these are considered veins and not arteries. Okay, they're going to transport that blood into the left atrium. Let me change the color. Now we're dealing with oxygenated blood, so this should be red. I'm sorry, the left atrium. This should be the left atrium. Okay. And we have 4 pulmonary veins. 1, 2, 3, and 4. All 4 of those are inserting right into that atrium. Okay. Next we have the, go ahead and ignore that for now. This right here is the mitral valve. Let me go ahead and label that real quick, spell that out for you. Mitral, this is the mitral valve. That separates the left atrium from the left ventricle. So it'll pass through the mitral valve into the left ventricle. After it travels through there, it's going to go through the aortic semilunar valve. Okay. Once it passes through the aortic semilunar valve, it's going to go to the aorta. And this is the main blood supply for the whole entire body. Okay. Okay. So if we look at all the steps to the heart, or blood flow through the heart. Oh, let me backtrack real quick. I want you guys to know this as well. pulmonary circulation. Pulmonary circulation refers to transporting the blood to the lungs to pick up oxygen and drop off CO2. Again, pulmonary always refers to the lungs. So the pulmonary circulation starts in the right atrium and ends in the lungs. Systemic circulation starts in the left atrium and ends at the rest of the body. Okay. Why is this systemic? Well, it's sending blood, oxygenated blood, to the rest of the system or rest of the body. Okay. Now, if we go through the pathway of blood, we start off with the superior and inferior vena cava. Follow that blood downward and upward. We're going to go into the right atrium. From the right atrium, we go through the tricuspid valve. After the tricuspid valve, we end up in the right ventricle, right here. From the right ventricle, we pass through the pulmonary. Why is this pulmonary? Well, it's headed towards the lungs now. Pulmonary semilunar valve. Okay, and these are called semilunar because they're half moon shaped. After the pulmonary semilunar valve, we end up in the pulmonary trunk. After the pulmonary trunk, we end up in the pulmonary arteries. Why are they arteries that are blue? Well, they're carrying deoxygenated blood and they're heading away from the heart. Next, we end up at the lungs, which would be here. Okay. From the lungs, how do we get back to the heart? We're going to go through the pulmonary veins. There's 4 of them. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we're going to end up in the left atrium. From the left atrium, we're going to pass through the mitral valve, right here. From the mitral valve, we end up in the left ventricle. From the left ventricle, we pass through the aortic semilunar valve. And from there, we end up in the aorta, which is the main artery that goes to the rest of the body. Okay? Again, we'll cover this more to class on Monday, and that is it for today, folks. I'll catch you next time.